good to be here. And you know what? It's good to be alive. I'm very proud of my son and my daughters. They have grown up to be wonderful people. But I'm here primarily because Pastor Mark asked if I'd come up here. Because if it had been Jimmy, I'd have figured there was a joke somewhere, or he was going to bring out a donkey or whatever. It's a unique situation with you having two pastors and then a third, Pastor Rocky, and at the church, because you get to see different personalities. You get to talk to people, to men and women that have been through what you are going through. You can go to all kind of mass churches that have high steeples and beautiful buildings and wonderful statues and honors and all. But when you get to a place like this, where you're dealing with a lot of people that are hurting, that have been hurting, what a ministry it is. And I enjoy when Pastor Mark speaks, because he's good, he's down to earth. You don't have to worry about a goat coming out here and then you sit there worrying, is that goat going to have an accident? And then you think, well, if a goat does that, it's not an accident, not for the goat. That's his natural way of doing things. And then to have the camaraderie of my grandson, who I wasn't even saying a word to, leans over and says, "Poppy, don't worry, I'm on poop patrol." And then I go and I know what bothered Pastor Mark one Sunday. Pastor Jimmy dropped the hoe right there upside down, and I was scared to death. Along with Pastor Mark, somebody was going to walk across and step on that hoe. It's going to fly up and hit them in the head, and then we're going to have somebody laid out there on the floor, and it wouldn't be a Pentecostal service. So it worried me. And I think it's kind of strange that on Monday, Jimmy is fighting fires, and on Sundays, he's trying to make fires. And I really love your pastors. Pastor Rocky, he's a wonderful man. He came to the place where I work, and I'll tell you where I work a little bit later if you don't know. And the people that were there, real jerky people. I mean, slime balls. After they left, they said, "Who was that really nice couple? There's something different about them." And I said, "Well, that's a friend of ours. He's Pastor Rocky." They said, "Pastor? Where was his coat and tie? Where was his suit?" And I look at the things that, the other day as I was thinking about this sermon, and I agree with the little kid over there, "Let's go home," because my stomach feels like it's churning. "Mama, let's go home." It reminds me of the time I was riding my bicycle. I was 6 years old, or maybe even 5, around the block. And Bumpy Osteen, maybe some of you remember him, he had a meanest German Shepherd dog, but it stayed inside the fence. And so I was riding around the block on my little bicycle, and Bumpy and Kenny and a couple other guys were rolling around wrestling in the grass. I turned the corner, and there's Bumpy's dog has gotten out of the fence. And he comes running towards me. And I'm pedaling as fast as I can and trying to run. And I think, "God help me, God help me." I should have said, "God help me," out loud. But all I could say was, "Mama! Mama!" And I had to face that for 2 weeks in school. As I would pass these little guys, they'd say, "Mama, Mama." But I want to speak a little bit today, start on the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes were part of Jesus' sermon. And it says here that he brought his disciples together and he told them how, being disciples, they should act and the attitudes they should have. And he says, I could hear Jesus saying, if you want to be a disciple, you have to have this attitude. And that's where they got the be attitude from. The Beatitudes are where blessed are the poor in spirit, and blessed are the meek. That's hard to come by in my family. And blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And they go right on down. I know you know them all. But blessed are you when people insult you. That's part of being a disciple for Christ. A lot of people don't understand what God is all about and what Jesus is all about. But you know what's so wonderful is we all have a ministry, and you are here only because God's not ready for you to go to glory and enjoy your reward. You still have a job to do. I know I never believed so much in these guys coming and saying they had a miracle, they had a vision, they had a dream of this happening and that happening. But I had a situation there where I thought I was in heaven, and I felt like I was in heaven. And as I was going to go in, I got turned around and said, your job, God says your job is not over yet. So I came back. And I fought and worked hard and built my strength back up and came back to work. But while I was home, I was out for 13 weeks, and then I had to go home and I couldn't walk to the mailbox, so I would watch TV. And as my kids know, I love Westerns. I know almost every Western that's been on TV. And my wife even says, I know the horses and what horse was on this program and which horse the Virginian had and all that. And she's right, I do. And so I had gotten kind of tired of watching that, so I turned it and I thought, well, I'll watch a couple of Christian programs. And as I was there, sitting there watching the programs, a game came up. I invented a game. And my game was, let's see if I click that channel, how long it takes that guy with the little pinky ring and the dyed black hair and maybe even the dyed black beard and the $400 suit to look at you through the TV and say, if you want God's blessings, sow the seed, send me some money. And I get to thinking, during those times when my sister died at the age of 24 with chronic hepatitis, she was 24, I was 25. She suffered for 5 months. And where were these guys when she was sick? We had an airport here. They could land with their airplane and come and see us. But it was the local people that supported my family, the local pastors, the pastors that on Sunday would work and help us at church and build us up. And on Monday, they would take their regular job and go to work at that. And they would sacrifice time on weekends that they could be with their families so they could prepare to feed us. And where were they when my daughter Angela went into a coma? And the doctors told us there's not a whole lot of hope, and they rushed her down to St. Mary's Hospital in an ambulance. And when we got there, one of those guys wasn't sitting there waiting to pray for us. It was a church member that was standing at the emergency room door, and how he beat us to West Palm Beach, and us in an ambulance with flashing lights. He was standing there. A lot of you may remember him. His name is Junior Harden, the most kind, compassionate man I've ever seen, and one of the most godly men I've ever seen. He was waiting there for us to pray with us. And when Jimmy and Chrissy and Angie's mother was dying with cancer, for 4 years she suffered, but not one of those great guys that built their big amusement parks and all. Not one of them flew into the Fort Pierce Airport to pray for us. It was people like you. It was church members. It was pastors like we have here that would come and even take her to the hairdresser or take her to maybe to get a massage, and when she was so sick. So I don't know why I'm talking about this. This wasn't what I was wanting to talk about. It just hit me that way in that I'm supposed to be talking about you are the salt of the earth. And this church is definitely the salt of the earth. Now, when you talk about salt, back in the old days, I say old days, back in days before refrigeration, salt was an extremely important thing because they would take food, meat, and other foods and rub the salt on it, and it would preserve it. It would keep the food from decaying. And when Jesus told the disciples, you are the salt of the earth, it must have really surprised them and shocked them because the disciples were nobody. They were just common men, fishermen, and men that loved God, loved the gospel. And Jesus is telling them they are the salt of the earth. They are what keeps sin down, and they build up the good things in life. Jimmy's and Chrissy's grandfather on their mom's side, he was Pastor Ralph Bunting. He and I didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, an awful lot of things, but I was a Christian and went to church. He was a Christian, went to church. He was a minister. I respected him, but we did have one thing in common. We both loved salt. One time, we were sitting at a table eating, and now let me tell you, this man fought in World War II. He was in a building that collapsed. He went to a prisoner of war camp. His coat was stolen in the middle of winter. He had nothing warm. His legs, his feet got frostbitten, and he had the will to live through all of that. But one day I'm sitting there at the table with Mama Pat, the one you named your kitchen after. And by the way, I hope you don't have any salt in that kitchen. But we're sitting there, and Papa reached across to get the salt. She slapped his hand and said, the doctor said no salt for you. And he looked at her in his tough, meaning way, and he said, life ain't worth living without salt. And so I felt the same way at 3 years old. We were down at the Southland cafeteria in Fort Pierce. Probably you don't remember that, but that was the place that church people went after Sunday school and after church. And I was 3 years old. I can still remember it. People say you don't remember a whole lot of things, but I remember this day. And we were sitting there, and our pastor and his wife were sitting across the way. My mom and dad were sitting over here. I was sitting here, and my little sister was sitting at the end of the table. And over here at the end of the table was a big shot church official from Cleveland, Tennessee, Church of God, home headquarters, and he had spoken in our service that day. And of course, everybody was trying to be stoic. And I looked over there and I saw the salt shaker. And I see that the salt shaker is crusted on top with all kind of salt. And me loving salt, I fought it and fought it. And then finally, I couldn't help it. I reached over, grabbed that salt shaker, and I licked it. And it'd have been fine if I hadn't have gone for the second lick. And my mother turned and looked at me, and she says, you're going to get it when you get home. And I did. I got it when I got home. It was one of the most miserable Sundays I had Sunday afternoon, and I was so happy to see Sunday night service come. Just like the time when I was sitting there in church, and the minister was getting ready to preach, and we had this gentleman by the name of Frank. I won't say his last name because it's a well-known family in town. But he had a wife. Her name was Frances. and Francis was sick. And I'm sitting there at the end and trying to be a good little guy because I knew what had happened with the salt shaker. And I was trying to be a good little guy and remembering this, Frank's wife was Frances. He stood up and said, before we have our sermon, could I ask the church to pray for my Fanny? And when he said that, I busted out laughing. It wasn't good. That time I got drug out to the front of the church, and there was an Australian pine tree that had hardly any branches or any needles on it because between me and Roger Bass and Terry Prescott, our mothers kept those needles off of that tree. And we promised ourselves, I don't know, I didn't do it, but we promised ourselves that one day we would go and cut that Australian pine tree down. And I'm going to run over there one day and see if it's still standing. And it may not be standing long. But as I've been talking, we have a heritage in our family of loving God and wanting to help people. And I look at you folks. When I was in the hospital, when the doctors didn't give me a whole lot of hope, and they had taken my heart out and worked on my body and put my heart back in and started it, but I coded twice, had 2 strokes. It wasn't, I'm back on this subject again, it wasn't the big shot guys and with their airplanes and cathedrals. It was you folks that prayed for me because Jimmy and Chrissy and John had asked. And by the way, if you guys would make sure that door is locked, because I don't want John trying to run in there and turn the mic down, because I got some things to say. But I just want you to know what you really have. I mean, the devil tries to beat us down and make us think that we have no power. But let me tell you something. I had a little great-grandmother that got married when she was 13 years old. She was in Vero Beach. And my great-grandfather was 16 years old. And he was as mean as the devil. He would upset people and get them, aggravate them till they just got angry. And my grandmother kept trying to get him to accept salvation, and he wouldn't do it. He just kept, even at work, the people hated him because he was so mean. One night, my great-grandmother was in her bedroom praying before she went to bed. My great-grandfather, Thompson, was her last name. I never even heard, I don't even remember his first name or hers either. I just called him Granny and Grandpa Thompson. But he was looking at the paper and just getting ready for bed. And he heard her praying in the bedroom. And she was saying, God, if you don't save my husband, just go ahead and kill him. Don't let him hurt anybody else. And this was on a Friday night, and Sunday he was in church, and he got saved, and he worked for the Lord the rest of his life. That's the kind of prayer I want to have. And I'm sure that's the kind of prayer you want to have. That you can ask God to kill somebody and scare them into coming into church. And I'm not condoning that. I'm not saying you should go home and pray for your husband or pray for your wife that God will kill them. But it worked in her situation. But I know I sit back there and I'm quiet. I'm a very timid person. I mind my own business, and I try to do what I can, and then I kind of sneak out after church so Jimmy and John and Chrissy and Julie can talk to you as a congregation. But you know what? I have never been so proud of my intermediate family as I am to this day and time. I think they are wonderful. I love my wife at home. She's at home right now. She has a very nervous condition. It's called Vernon. And I know she's watching. And I know that Angie is at her church with her head down and the thing in her ear, watching this service by video. But I'm so proud of them. And one thing that really made me realize that my kids were on the right path many, many years ago. Little Chrissy was small, and she would have friends come over and spend the night with us, and we'd take them to church the next day, different friends and all. And one of her friends came over one night, and we went to Sunday school, had the service, and we were heading to lunch. You weren't Church of God if you didn't go somewhere for lunch on Sunday. And the little girl was trying to impress us. And she said, you know, I know the mayor. And she said, I know the chief of police. And she said, I know the sheriff. And I guess Chrissy had had enough. And so Chrissy says, you know, and she called the girl's name. She said, you know, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And out of a little babe, you know, out of the mouths of babes. And that's how it is with us. It's not who we know, it's who knows us. And God knows us. And it makes me feel great. If God were to drop me tomorrow, I would know that God's work for me was finished and someone else would carry on, and I would be in heaven enjoying all the joys of heaven with my relatives, with my mom, my sister, with everyone that has been in my family, that's in my family, and in my church. And even people that have been here that have passed away. It's a wonderful thing to know where you're going. And it's a terrible thing not to know where you're going. And I was coming to this church the second week. And I had sneaked out the door and I was walking down the sidewalk to my car. And these two big, gruffly guys with beards and hair that was oily, and their hands had black fingernails. They were walking towards me. And I thought to myself, my Lord, you've saved me from dying in the hospital, and now you're going to let me die right here in front of this church on this sidewalk. They're holding two bags in their hands. And in my mind, I think these bags are holding two .357 revolvers. And so they walk up towards me, and I can't get around them. I can't run because I've got 30% of my heart working, and I can't run. So one of them says, thanks. And I thought, of thanks for what? What has Jimmy done this time? And, and so I said, thanks for what? And he says, just thanks a lot. And I said, you're welcome. And I went on to my car, got in it, locked the door, and took off. Well, I asked Jimmy the next day, what was this all about? They were holding bags, and they told me thanks. And he says, oh, some of the church ladies prepare a meal for the homeless on Sunday. And these guys were thanking me, my second Sunday of being in this church, thanking me for the meal that you ladies have prepared for them. That's probably the only good meal they have through the whole week, because they're probably looking in dumpsters and other places for something to eat. And you know, everybody that's homeless is not there because of something they did. It's because of a situation that may have arisen. And by the grace of God, we could be in that same spot. And I know you got Brother Paul back there. He don't think I remember him. I remember him many, many years ago. And I always thought, if I ever get in trouble, if anybody's ever going to attack me, I hope Paul's around. And then I turn around and now he's a deacon, and I don't know if he'd beat anybody up or not. So I got to find somebody else. But you have so many ministries here, and there's so many, each of you are placed in a spot that only you can work from. You might be careful when you pray, God, give me a better job. God, take me out of this place. God, give me a better husband and give me a better wife. God's placed you where you're at for some reason. And you might be the only thing that's standing between that person and hell and a wicked devil. Because the devil don't care. He wants those people for himself. He is going to be spending time in hell, and he wants people to go there with him. And our job is to keep these people from ending up in that spot. It's wonderful to see men sitting here with no ties. I hate ties. My wife made me wear a tie this morning because she said my t-shirt was showing. And she doesn't like that. But it's wonderful to come here in this church and you walk in the door the first time I did and you feel a peace. You feel comforted. You don't feel all that strictness. And I promised myself I was going to have a little thing because Jimmy always has a goat or a lamb or something. And so I have this. This is a little salt shaker. And then I have this. That is another little salt shaker. All right. I've seen people build these massive, beautiful, shiny salt shakers. And the salt is never used from inside. They stay inside this shaker. And how the people think these arrogant, I say arrogant, I shouldn't say things like that, but these arrogant people, they sit in these churches. They sit in these congregations. And it's you're for, my for, and no more. And that's how they think. They're not willing to get out there and bring people in. So we'll call this those guys. And we'll call this Fairlawn. I know it's a little bunny rabbit with ears on it. And people come here because it's something special. They come to Fairlawn because it's something special. I like it because you can take it and go. And the salt comes out. It's different. And that's what I love about this church. And I hope that this is just the beginning of the ministries of this church. Yesterday was a wonderful time, and Jimmy's right. I've never felt so close to him. But he expressed the desires of you on helping others and having a ministry for children that don't have a home. Having a ministry for ladies that are beat up and battered and don't have a place to go. A ministry for men that have lost their jobs, that have lost their pride and feel like they've lost everything. You are special. And that most of us have been in that position or another similar to it. And that's what I love about this church. And that's why I plan on staying here at this church. Thank you. I have to take these home. My wife made me bring them back.